So I founded our company 30 Ninjas with Doug Lyman about 7 years ago, actually, and we specialized in digital media, multi-platform storytelling, mostly primarily for interactive narratives for TV shows and for movies. We are waiting for the next slide to come up.
This is
But about a year and a half ago, we decided to start developing original stories specifically to be done outside of the studio system. Doug's an A-list. For those of you who don't know, Doug is a big Hollywood movie director. He directed The Bourne Identity, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He originally did Swinger. He did one of his first movies was Swingers, Edge of Tomorrow.
Go.
He is really most interested in doing stuff that he's never done before and that has never been done before. So we decided to take one of our stories, Invisible, and do it as an VR experience. Not knowing how to do that, what we did was write it and then do a test where we had a week, and I had 3 different VR teams come up to Martha's Vineyard, and we shot. The Invisible's written by Melissa Wallach. She wrote Dallas Buyers Club. She's a screenwriter. We, in that time, met Lewis, and basically from that moment on, which was last August, have done nothing but VR pretty much 24/7. Invisible's a 30-minute miniseries about a family that has a superpower. You can guess what it is. And it's an action thriller. Doug is one of the directors. There are other directors. Simon Crane is another director. He's a second unit director and stunt director. He took a hiatus from Star Wars to come shoot with us. And we worked with Samsung and Condé Nast for Invisible. We're going to show you some of those projects, some images and a little bit from behind the scenes of Invisible. What I'm going to pass to Lewis, but one of the things that we discovered really early on is that whatever our expectations were about what we needed in order to tell the story, they were constantly being proven wrong, and we became incredibly iterative, both with the technology and our technology partners, whether it's Chris with the post-production, or Jaunt with the camera, and how we could evolve the camera to suit our narrative needs, and how our narrative needs and how we would creatively have to restructure and rethink what we wanted to shoot in order to maximize our technical ability. And Lewis...
I can hop in.
Yeah.
So, Lewis Smithingham. I've been doing 360 video and photogrammetry for about 5 years now. Photogrammetry primarily before getting into 360 video. I'm gonna jump over the whole 360 video is not VR because that conversation is usually fairly unproductive. So we're gonna, for the rest of the conversation, we'll refer to VR. We're referring to 360 video specifically in this context. I'm aware of that debate. I just want to head off the trolls before they start. So I was brought in early on. I've been doing 360 video for a while, shooting a lot of stuff underwater with animals, you know, your typical 360 video stuff, nothing jumping out of planes, but your typical stuff. Brought onto a camera test with Doug Lyman last summer, which was crazy and amazing, and I think Julina touched on it. Part of the thing that's so exciting about working with Doug is how iterative and how creative and how much of a team player it was. It was like going to summer camp, and you know, it was like, oh, let's try this, and he had a total ignorance of, it was amazing, of all the sort of rules that everybody else is trying to tell us, that you can't cut fast, you can't move the camera, like, oh, you'll make people nauseous, all this sort of patronizing nonsense that makes your audience members seem stupid, which I don't know, I don't agree with it either, and the series speaks to that.
I would say that if there was one rule that has, from the first day of the test, that continues to probably a phone call that I'll have later on today, just don't bore the audience. Yeah. Tell the story, don't forget what the story is, and don't be boring.
Yeah.
That's it.
Absolutely. And I think, so anyway, as the project sort of started to come in, I was asked to edit as well as shoot, and editing 360 video is a thing, particularly a year ago when the tools that we have today weren't there. And I got this call and kind of panicked and called Chris and was like, dude, I have to edit with a Hollywood director and I don't want to have that situation where it's like, hold on, sir, let me render and then export to a headset and then give you the headset and hope the renders didn't mess up and then you can watch it. I need to have a solution and I need to be able to make changes actively because this guy's just not going to be able to tolerate that with good reason. And so we started working with Mettle. Mettle developed the VR player. I think I started on that in like October, September or something absurdly early.
So it's just a blur. This past year and a half has been just a blur. It's one thing after another. It's unbelievable. So to chime in a bit with Lewis, Lewis reached out to us, and I'll give you a bit of a background on Mettle. Mettle started off as a production studio. We come from an artistic background. We're actually ex-art directors, ex-creative directors that have moved more into product development now. So we certainly have a great respect for storytelling and the creative process. So Lewis reached out and said, I didn't know there was a famous director involved, quite frankly. If you said it, I didn't know about it. I don't know, whatever, it went over my head. So Lewis reached out and said, listen, I'm doing some tests and we're thinking of shooting this way and doing this and the other thing. And at the time, to premise this a bit, most people's notion of doing storytelling in 360 was throw an array into a room, cross your fingers, and you get a 15-minute sequence that, quite frankly, bored most everybody.
And I would argue it's still the same today, for the most part.
It's way better now.
It's better.
Way better now, Lewis. So Lewis's approach, where he emanated that there was a great respect for the script, that the script basically dictated the process. And I love that. I mean, without even knowing Condé Nast is involved and Doug Liman is involved, I was just so committed to this project. I can't tell you, because this is what this medium needs. It needs people that respect the medium, that will try, fail, move forward, create great stories. There's no story here, there's no medium. It's as simple as that. No matter what bells and whistles we throw at it, no matter what effects we throw at it, a good story is a good story. So, unbeknownst to Lewis, like every software developer, we had a roadmap, right? So we had certain things that we wanted to do, and some of those items were not that high priority for us. But after talking to Lewis, we quickly changed things to accommodate this project because of the respect that we saw for the medium, and because, again, the respect that we saw coming out of 30 Ninjas for the story.
And to back up on the story, that flows directly into post. One of the things, Jelena talks about how the rule was to never bore people, and I think that a lot of 360, just the disrespect for cutting, the disrespect for editing as a medium. So we started to approach this from this perspective that, if you consider Moore's law and you consider that in perspective of the persistence of vision and in the way in which we perceive images, in terms of development of 360 video, we're probably in the 50s, if we were comparing this to film. So then I thought, if it works for Hitchcock, why wouldn't it work for us? And so if you watch throughout the series, you'll see the pacing of the edits are about, I would argue, 50s era Hitchcock and a lot of the camera work is actually kind of Hitchcock. It's interesting, and so we started using things in the camera test right away, which was so exciting. We started doing parallel editing, which I'd never seen before in 360 video, which was crazy interesting and crazy exciting.
By the way, a really successful technique for cutting in 360.
And for film in general, it was amazing seeing that consistently, being able to have two stories tell at the same time, being able to build tension in much the same way that filmmakers did in the 20s. But it felt like this insane revelation to suddenly be able to have this new storytelling tool. And Mettle and 360 and SkyBox completely enabled that, because it was the sort of situation where we have an idea, let's audition it. And instead of in the past where, months prior I would render, and then I would wait, and then I would watch it, and then I would realize there were drop frames, and so I would go back to the render and do it again, and on and on and on and on and on. And being able to work iteratively in the way that the Lyman works and the way 3D Ninjas work enabled that process to be. There's some really interesting stuff that we do, and it's very different from a lot of other 360 video, and I think it has more in common with cinematic storytelling than it does with 360 in general.
So thank you, Louis, but we can't take full credit, really. This whole journey, we've seen almost the perfect storm build. It's incredible, from YouTube announcing the 360 format, the Google Cardboard, this whole democratization. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the right things happening at the right time, including hardware. I mean, I cannot imagine trying to do mastering in 4K or 8K without the right hardware and software solutions. It would be insane. There would be no chance for this medium. It would probably go the way of stereo 3D, quite frankly. Too difficult, too expensive to produce for, and the net benefit to the viewing audience is, well, yeah, okay, that's nice, that's interesting, but let's move on, right? This is not a move on point. This is here to stay, as far as we're concerned. This is incredible. It's challenging.
We talked about this last night with regard to the hardware. You know, it comes down to very simple things where, like, if I'm in and out of a headset for 8 to 12 hours a day, if I don't have a machine that's stable and running fast, it becomes physically painful and actually quite nauseating, because you're juddering, the lag and all of that really, really is awful and is completely nauseating. And so having stability and having performance in every aspect of our workflow has been, I mean, enabling, I suppose. Like, I don't think we would be able, or certainly wouldn't be able to do it as well, because we'd want to look at it once and then never look at it again.
Well, and it drastically affects the feedback for the story. So I think in some place here we have some photos of Doug in headset, and we have another one of one of our engineers on Conan in headset. And we direct in headset. So we have pretty much a rule that anybody on the team who's giving notes can't give notes just watching it on a screen. They have to put it in headset, because nobody has the imagination muscles at this point to know what it's going to feel like between a cut if they're not seeing it in headset.
So that's one of the things we did, and 30 Ninjas prompted that effort. I mean, it just brought it up on our priority list, right? So what we did is we created a direct-to-Rift player from Adobe products. So you can actually view all your edits and all your editing and your design stuff right in context, which is very important.
In stereo, right? And mono.
That's right, yeah. So I mean, you can actually keep the headset on and grade, because this is your context, this is your medium, right? So you're grading in context, you're designing in context, you're editing in context. We went a little bit further than some of the other people that announced the player. We actually exposed workspace mode as well. So if you're previewing and watching something and something's not quite to your taste, you don't need to take the HMD off and continue to work. You can actually keep it on, switch over to workspace mode, and you've got the whole of Adobe After Effects or Premiere Pro right there. And you can tweak and position things to your heart's content. So in context, in the moment, design decisions and editing decisions. This was wonderful. And as I said, 30 Ninjas was a big reason that player just climbed up high on our priority list.
And that aspect is hugely helpful for things like color grading, where you're making tiny incremental changes, and you need to be able to see them instantly without having to take your headset off. And there's also a factor that I've discovered with color grading where your eyes adjust when you take off the headset, and then you have to put it back on, wait for them to adjust, recolor. And that's a fail point right there, because I had a while, I was like, why aren't my colors sitting? And it's because that your eyes are adjusting. This is a shot of us in Haiti. Invisible has been shooting all over the place. This is us in a market in Haiti.
And that's the John camera to the right over there.
The lead character and there's a picture of her later, but the lead character, Tatiana, works at a relief organization, an NGO. And so the story begins, she gets a phone call that she has to come back to the family she's escaping. Haiti was one of the more challenging, I would say it's the most, for me, it's the most challenging shooting environment we've ever been in. We shoot with very small crews, whether we're in Haiti or wherever we are, including Conan, because more people in VR, you have to have the right people on your team, not more people on your team, and often more opinions don't help.
We had a three-person crew.
Four-person crew. But everybody needs to be able to understand and, if necessary, step in and do everything. Everyone has an area of specialty, but everybody knows the entire process so that they know what each camera on set can do. We think of cameras as lenses. We think of camera systems as lenses, not, so you can't use if a jaunt is right for one shot and a Nokia Ozo is right for another shot or another situation.
Or even a GoPro modified for C-mount. I have a number of GoPros modified for C-mount with 1.34 or 1.07 millimeter lenses that are like my little trick lenses in the back pocket, or an A7S with an 8 mil or something like that. It's, you know, we love all systems and having to work together in the same way that you would have an 18, a 35, a 50, and an 85 on set. You pivot to different camera systems for that. But you have to know how they all work, and you have to know the problems. Shooting in Haiti.
You can see too the mic that we're using to capture the 360 sound. Do you want to talk
Yeah,
about
that's a Tetra mic, an Amazonic Core Tetra mic. I'm not going to pretend that I am a sound genius for 360. There's a guy, Tim Gadamer, who is an absolute genius. He's speaking later today, and he, I just do what he says. But shooting in Haiti had its whole host of challenges. You know, this camera has 24 SD cards. So dumping in 2 raids in a solar-powered hotel that switched to generator every night.
and the camera is encased in metal, so it gets really hot.
Yeah.
Fast. So it was. And of course shooting with security guards and all that.
And of course they're all ambient cool, because where do you put a fan? You don't, and also fans make noise, so we had issues with heat, not as many as I would have expected because we closely monitored throughout the shoot, but it was incredibly challenging.
But it comes back to having the tools that we use, needing them to be as robust as robust as possibly exists, basically.
Yes.
So as a side note to that, when we were building the original offering for After Effects, our notion was to make it as flexible an environment as possible. So to think that the only way that you can shoot 360 is with an array was silly to us at Mettle. Why would we not use something like an Alexa where we need more color depth, more pixels, and then more importantly, if the script called for a very performance-driven shot where the complicity is important, the director's complicity, that they need to be in that shot. They need to help draw that performance out, right? Why couldn't you take a single camera shot and then just be able to comp it into a 360 environment? So we gave the content creators that much latitude. So what we're trying to do is sort of take all the technical boundaries away as much as possible and let that script dictate the process, right? And make it as easy as possible to just get it back into a new medium. So yeah, you're not stuck with a jaunt, you're not stuck with an Ozo, you can do pretty much what you want. And I mean, this comes back from cinema, right? I mean, I've been involved in productions where we've shot GoPros, little GoPros, we've had stuff on iPhone, we've had, I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of sources come back in, and it, you know, if it helps tell the story, it helps tell the story. Nobody will judge it one way or another, right?
Yeah, I'd agree, and you hit on something interesting. The picture-in-picture thing is something I'm really excited about and fascinated in in VR and 360 storytelling and VR storytelling. I think that a lot of people talk about theater as an influence for 360 video and VR. I never thought about theater once while this was going on. I thought more about the way storytelling is told in comic books, how you may have a wide scene and then you think about, oh, you know, there's the different panels make up the different close-ups, and thinking about how storytelling evolves in that medium, and then the sort of cross between graphic, physical, sequential art, and then sequential art as cinema and cinematic storytelling, I think really drove us as a space. There's this another shot of the John. So
This is interesting. That's Doug right there, and this is the first day of shooting, and he started the whole shoot with doing the classic one, and by the end we would do this, and then if we wanted the camera down there, but basically all of our techniques evolved. This scene in particular, he actually also, we had 4 scenes going on down 4 different hallways. This was at the nexus of 4 different hallways. And he was literally directing dialogue in different scenes in all the different directions, in all the different hallways. Do you want to? Again, that's the character Susan, and the jaunt on the slider. We used motion. We used motion a lot, and we started out with the feeling that motion was expensive, and our partners were very nervous about it making people sick, and that there were a lot of rules. This is a good example of a pretty slow slider shot that works well, and actually is in the series. By the end, I will say, this was the 3rd day of shooting. By the 14th day of shooting, we had, and I think we have a shot of this later on, we were running the jaunt on a remote-controlled car down a cobblestone alley in Tribeca at top speed.
yeah, and this is a 1-minute move.
And this was the longest, slowest move in the history of cinema. We were all. But as long as the camera movements are motivated by the story, so that the viewer knows and feels why they're moving, it is an extremely successful technique, we feel. Just as successful we did drone shots, we hung a jaunt off a building, they were very good partners. Let me just put it that way. But you do have to do certain things. You have to stabilize you have to do as much stabilization as possible.
Motion dampening was particularly important for a lot of the shots, because motion dampening starts this sort of jello motion, which is really awful. But I think Jelena hit on something really good, and I always liken this back to a cat with a laser pointer. If you have a cat with a laser pointer, you can run the cat right into a wall and back. They'll follow it no matter what, but if you end the laser pointer here and you turn it off and then start it behind them, they won't follow it. And so I think that a lot of the editing techniques and the camera techniques follow this, where like, if there's a reason to look that way when it's moving, it's cool. It's funny, because that's what they do in movies too. Unmotivated moves don't usually happen. But for some reason in VR, it's really cool to move the camera for no reason at all.
The other thing that we do, because it's specifically the type of storytelling that we were doing, there was not always story happening in 360 in all directions. This girl, for a lot of the series, spends a lot of time alone in this room. So if you want to look at the wall, you can. But for the most part, you're going to be looking at her, which we feel works. The series, by the way, you can't see it now. We're going to premiere it in September, most likely at a film festival in September. I guess that's a little TBD.
Do we want to, does anybody have any questions even now? We can take a bit of a break and then.
We should talk about live first, or?
Well, no, let's find out what people are interested in. It might be good, so we could focus what we're talking about. You guys are here because you knew that we were talking about what we've been doing for the past year is narrative storytelling. Are you interested in multi-camera work? As most people here, post-production, right?
Yeah. Do you want to hear more about the post-production side, the acquisition side? Please.
I'm not shy. Color correction. We were talking about taking it off and having your eyes adjust. How do you calibrate the actual headset?
Oh, that's interesting. That's a really good question. So you have to look and figure out where the headsets are sourced. They all pretty much have cell phone screens in them. And it's shocking actually how color accurate to each one Samsung's are. They don't vary that much between each phone. Like one Samsung S7 is going to be very similar to Samsung S7s. It's not like, you know, like a ViewSonic versus other ViewSonics where they'll change tremendously. So we looked at building LUTs for a Vive, a DK2, a CV1, and for Samsung S7. Primarily S7 because I think that's where the most people are going to be viewing this. Also one of our partners is Samsung. But you know, looking at the different variations between the different headsets, which were shockingly not as bad, but you know, you do in the same way that you would have a LUT for different monitors, you would calibrate for that. So I never used, when I was editing, I never used an ISO for color. I always looked at what my output would be. Like I don't care if the monitor looks beautiful, like when I put it on a consumer phone, it's not going to look like that. So I shouldn't try to crush the blacks for the beautiful ISO monitor, which is, you know, it's gonna look like this muddy mess on a different screen. And so we definitely pivoted towards that. Simulate Scratch allows you to look and color grade in headset. Also, so does Adobe Premiere and the Lumetri looks, which I used throughout the series, and building different LUTs that way I bring in as cubes to actually edit and bring on different LUTs throughout the editing process. I mean, color's hard, particularly until recently when you don't have a feedback the way that we have with VR Player. It's nightmarish. I remember last summer doing color grades on some stuff for Discovery Channel and being like, you would do a grade and then you would output it and then you would load it onto your phone and then you would watch it on the player on your phone and then it wouldn't be right, so you would go back and you would do that, and like each increment would be maybe 5 minutes. So you'd spend a day doing nothing. So yeah, it's hard.
One follow-up question. When you were building your LUTs, how are you measuring the actual device, or were you just building it by eye?
I tried to get measurements on the different devices, and it didn't work. It didn't.
Curvature of the lenses, right?
Yeah, it didn't work. I tried doing it like getting a spider and taking the components out of the spider and putting a spider on the internal lenses, and then taking it apart and putting it on the actual monitor screen. But that didn't really work because of the curvature of the lenses, as you said, and because of the filtration that goes on between the lenses and the actual screen. So you really have to actually calibrate for what hits the lens, not what the screen inside of it. Because I mean, headsets, HMDs, it's a screen. It's essentially a small monitor. It's about that big with lenses in front of it. And so like if you color grade for the screen and not the lenses, then you've just failed, because the lenses are going to change everything. And so I tried putting a spider, but that didn't really work because that was kind of weird, and 3D affects things a little bit as well. So it ended up being, this is what I think a DK2 looks like. This is what Rec 709 looks like in a DK2. This is what Rec 709 to me looks like. I would love for it to be a more precise science, but I think until ISO makes a headset or whoever makes a headset, or there's some sort of like, you know, RGB, it's not. You're going to have to do it by eye and have a colorist you rely on and work on your own gut instincts. And I think be able to flex, because they're all going to change too. So having a feedback was really what was most important there.
But what's interesting is that we're fortunate enough to be able to work with the Oculus team, a lot of great engineers there, Facebook team, and of course Adobe, right? So a lot of what you're talking about right now should really happen at the host level, at the API level, where we as developers can tap in and do pretty much anything we want. So remember, this is very young, right? Very, very young. And the fact that we've even gotten this far is quite a testament, I think, collectively. I don't take credit for it, I say collectively, right? All the tech partners. So there's a lot of feature requests that we've already put forth to the Oculus team and to the Adobe team, and you know what? They're motivated, and that's key. So I'm not saying we're going to get it, but there's good reason to do so, right? So there you go. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your post-production workflow? You mentioned 24 SD cards. How do you work with all of that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So Jaunt has an amazing program that basically just brings everything together. You load your cards in, they go up to the cloud, they stitch. But you still have an amazing glut of footage, because when you think about with VR, like your heads and tails are absurd, and your shooting ratios get terrible because you sync, and our syncing process is this complicated system of flash, sound, physical spin, and charts, because I'm a bit obsessive. You have that, so that takes 30 seconds, and then you got to find a place to hide, and then you got to go hide and make sure your monitoring system is working, and then you roll, and then you do the reverse on the back end. So you have these gigantic heads and tails. And so post-production process involved using a system of watch folders that when things would download, when stitches would download, I'd run them through a watch folder to normalize them to H.264. I found that H.264 was just the simplest to deal with in terms of being able to view it on multiple platforms. I also wanted to be able to sync to cloud and be able to quickly bounce between different computers. When one computer was rendering, I wanted to be editing on another computer. And so we'd have 3 or 4 computers set up, and I'd do one thing here, and then I'd run over to the next one, I'd do the next thing, and I'd do the next thing. And so using a system of watch folders that would automatically re-encode things to H.264, I personally find that 30 Mbps on a VBR pass with 100 at the top end tends to be a nice little sweet spot there. Files never really get bigger than a gig. They're usually around 180 to 360 megabytes. And that meant you would have reasonable file sizes for the huge amount that you had to deal with. So we would import the footage, stitch it would stitch in the cloud, or it would be stitched by our post house, depending upon the camera system. And then we would download them, normalize things. Obviously we had different file sizes and different aspect ratios. The Jaunt files come back at 4x4, so 4K by 4K, or 2K by 2K. Some of the GoPro files would come back at bizarre different aspect ratios. Some of the other cameras we use would come back. And so we had to be able to flex and use a variety of aspect ratios in a single timeline, which is interesting to do. I started the project editing in mono, and then as I got more comfortable, I started editing in stereo, which meant having, if you've ever seen stereo lat longs, it's over under or top bottom, depending upon your preference. And so editing like that, and then falsifying that by having 2 identical mono feeds on top of that, and cutting between stereo and mono, and using VR Player, which is amazing because it's able to pretty seamlessly move between mono and stereo and play back. And particularly if you do mono over mono, it says, oh, that's stereo, cool, I'll play that back as stereo. And being able to have a timeline with 10 different types of aspect ratio, 10 different types of clips, all in the same thing. But we did keep to H.264 just to keep render times down, and also, quite honestly, file size, so that I can dance between computers. But that was our general workflow. It was.
Do you want to talk about our workflow for Conan?
Oh yeah, I mean, if we can, the live thing, it's funny because 2 things have been brought up about, go ahead.
Sorry, can we just do one more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
By all means,
Into the live stuff?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. It's just a different post process, so that.
Yeah.
But another question, we'll come back to it.
Okay, well, we can cover that when we get there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And this demonstrates lighting to 360, and we had a lighting designer who is brilliant beyond words. His name is John Engstrom, and he used to light for David LaChapelle, so he's used to hiding lights and having somebody who's like, oh, I want to shoot here, I want to shoot here, I want to shoot here, I want to shoot here. And so we had this space where he would light for the entire space, and he would hide things so that if we wanted to move the camera, we didn't have to spend another hour repoing lights. And so this space, there's light all over the place. There's actually 2 10Ks lighting this. Actually, I think there's 4. 1 in the room. But they're hidden all over the place, and I think that speaks to the sort of pivoting and play you have to do with 360 unless you want to spend a huge amount of time and money painting out things.
So one of the things we added at a software level is because of low light conditions, I mean, even with very clever lighting like this, most cameras have a rough time dealing with this, right? So you're getting a lot of noisy data. trying to use denoisers, off-the-shelf denoisers, or linear spaced denoisers, if you will, don't work. It breaks the scene. So at one point, you're going to turn around and you're going to see this hard scene line because the software's not built for it. So we've built a whole series of 360 post effects, denoising, sharpening, glows, blurs, they all suffer. And we're going to continue to do that because you just can't work with the existing tool set.
And hitting on denoising, denoising is such a crucial aspect of any 360 production because essentially we're dealing with security camera sensors, which until we start having low light security camera sensors, which are being developed, you're going to be dealing with sensors that aren't made to be taking images like that. So there will be noise because when people are CCTVing a mall, they don't really care that it's a noisy image. However, we do. So denoising is this huge integral part that is a massive pain point also because, as I'm sure all of you know, doing a reasonable denoising pass takes a huge amount of rendering.
Well, not with us.
This is true.
Not with us. So to that point, we've been lucky enough to work with a lot of our tech partners, and they've been very helpful in getting our code over to, we started off in OpenGL, which is pretty damn quick, if I may, to begin with, but we've moved all the code over from OpenGL to OpenCL to CUDA. So depending on your system, we'll sniff out what's going on and say, that's the path for you, that works best for you. So they're blazingly fast. Denoising is crazy
And
fast.
seamless.
Yeah, and seamless, which is key.
Is there another question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, for when you're shooting on set, does the director have a monitor that he can actually see what the camera's filming? And also, do you have to paint out equipment and crew members from every shot? And how do you deal with that with stereo?
So in terms of monitoring for invisible, we taped a Theta camera to the top of to the top. Sometimes we used iPhones and FaceTimed. Most likely, in most scenarios, it was a Theta that then was just, we all hid and watched a tiny little screen, and the director held it, and it's basically directing by surveillance. There were a couple scenarios with invisible where we had directors. We had four directors for invisible for different episodes. The final episode was Simon Crane's episode, and there's a giant action sequence, giant for us, 2-minute fight where we smashed the entire diner. Since Simon in particular was a former stunt man, who was actually started his career by being James Bond's stunt double. He was in the scene. He wasn't fighting, he was an extra, but he was able to direct by doing that. We also, because of that scene, only had 2 takes. We shot it, and then this had 4 camera systems going. 5.
96 sensors on set.
96 sensors on set. We stitched together the sequence, saw the whole first take, so we allowed him to actually see what the primary camera got, and then went back and did the second take. So we used a couple of different techniques. We did not paint out crew members for the most part. There are only a handful. I can think of 4 scenes off the top of my head where we needed to paint out a director.
Never a crew member, always a director.
It was never a crew member. It was always, one of them was me. I think I was in 2 scenes, and then Doug was in 2 scenes.
You'd find, a big part of it is finding, as a post-production person, knowing what's an easy paint out. Like, it's like, oh, well, that's a wall. If I put somebody against that wall where there's no shadows, it's gonna be really easy to paint out that dude. However, if you're like standing in front of this screen, it's not gonna be as easy. So it's just, if you need to have something, sometimes the director has to have that immediacy. We did have, as you said, the Theta running out to a Raspberry Pi, which then went out to a Wi-Fi extender, which then was webcast internally on a small Wi-Fi network internally so that we could all look at it at once. But if you've ever looked at the Theta, the video feed is cool, but...
We also placed in the stunt sequence, we placed GoPros, and so that certain people could actually see. And in one case, in the diner scene, the diner actually had a surveillance system, and we were directing through their surveillance security cameras.
Yeah.
So you can see, we used whatever means necessary. Painting out is extremely expensive, and we never, ever wanted to paint out lights. That was one of the things. That was a stop production rule, basically.
But others have done it effectively.
Others may do it.
Yeah.
It's just something that we don't.
It's how important is it to your story? How important is
Yeah.
what's priorities? What do you?
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's,
that's how we
others
dealt with
do
it.
it a lot.
Right, and that's specifically for Invisible. For Conan 360, which we shot with all Ozo, how we looked at that was an entirely different story, and we can go into that. But that.
Oh yeah, this is fun.
Okay.
Welcome to Conan. So.
Single
I'm
flow
gonna-
chart.
Yeah, I'll let you take over since it's your
Um,
passion.
So this was a shoot in San Diego, which I grew up in San Diego, but San Diego might as well be Fargo in terms of camera stores. Have fun finding a BNC cable. So I got obsessive and numbered everything. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to have 4 switched cameras, which is not a big deal. It shouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah, why don't you give an overview before
Yeah.
going into each
Well, I'm not going to go
individual
micro
camera?
because that'll take forever.
Yeah.
Basically, cameras on the left that barrel out to a backstage preview station where we would be able to make changes to exposure quickly over the Wi-Fi network. That's that section. These are physical. These are meant. The double lines are meant to represent walls. Then a fiber run of several thousand feet upstairs to our control room, our engineering room, which was very hot and had a flooding air conditioner, and we had a fun first day over engineering how to get the water out of the room. It ended up being a system of pond pumps that we promptly stopped using because we found out they were dumping water on the grips. Then it goes into a regular, like basically once, if you see where it says HyperDeck 4 raw ISO, and then you see the streamers, once it hits those streamers, which are the stitching boxes, they're hardware boxes, it's basically just a normal show. It's a UHD show. Oh, I have a laser pointer. Look at that. There's
Topmost button.
topmost button. So right here, it becomes a UHD show. Yay! And then it's pretty standard. You know, we're recording every different type: raw, unstitched, stitched, and the program feed. So it goes into an ATEM over here. Now the thing that I was obsessed about is I wanted every single computer to be connected over a network so that if anything ever went down or if a monitor got kicked, which they did, you could just terminal into another computer and have a look at that computer and be able to see that computer. We also wanted to, Conan came to us and said, look, this year we want to be able to live switch and we want to be able to see it in headset live. And everybody said no.
We have a video of that.
We'll show them in a second. Yeah, everybody said no, and so I went to Chris and was like, I figure out how to do this. I said I could do it. Oops. And so what's going on over here is there's a line out from the switcher over here. It's a BNC out into the Dell War Machine, which is my 7910. I name all of my things after things from Road Warrior. And it goes into a DK1, or DK2. Actually, we ended up using a CV1 because for some reason I found it worked better, and my DK2 got broken in shipping, which is a shame because DK2s are better for hair. Anyway, and then it played back through a system of different players, and then went directly out to another feed, which went out to an AJFS2, and then out to a KeyPro. The AJFS2 was to normalize the signal. They wanted it to be, so we're shooting at 30, right? We're shooting at 30 4K. Now, when you're in a UHD switcher, there's no switcher that works at 30, so it has to be normalized down to 2997 at UHD. Now, the show is broadcast at 60i, 1080. So we had to change the signal there and then kick it out to them via KeyPro. All that had to happen in near real time so that, as you'll see in a bit, when somebody from the show puts on a headset, it's not like
and then a lag of 45 seconds, which an elemental encoder, as awesome as they are, if anybody knows about web encoding, you do have a lag there no matter what because of the buffering, because of the cache and the packets and all of that. So we were able to get it down to, it varied between 48 and 52 frames, which is pretty insane when you consider going from this insane pipe direct to live TV in 48 frames. I was really stoked about that. And of course, by the way, there's an absurd amount of media. We had 18 SSDs every single day. So 4 cameras, times 2 for the RAW, times 2 for the stitch, and then 2 for the program, which was a fun amount of data. So there was a really complicated server system set up here so that we could sleep at night and back up data at the same time. I don't know what the next slide is. I don't know how to use this.
If I may jump in, Louis, here, am I on? We're good? Yeah, okay.
You're good.
So if I may jump in, we'll loop back to one of the first things I said, where this relationship has spawned some incredibly great things. So where we call it a second screen. What we introduced as a feature into the VR player is a second screen. So what that basically means is that whatever the Rift user is seeing can be projected to another monitor. So that was on our roadmap, and the use case for something like that would have been client sessions, right? If you're sitting down and you're working with your client and they're looking at something, you can quickly see what they're talking about and be able to understand and get the session going a lot smoother. So definitely the second screen was on our roadmap, but then when Louis approached us and said, wait a second, director's point of view, because this is basically what it is, well, guess what happened? That just went right up to the top of the list.
I think there's another shot of that actually in action. And we use this for color grading, by the way. Like we had 52 frames that we could color grade, so we could see color grades in almost real time, which was so awesome.
So we'll go ahead and play.
This week we are broadcasting our shows in virtual reality thanks to our good friends at AT&T. That's right, you can watch our show in VR via Conan Cardboard and other VR devices. We have 4 Conan 360 cameras placed all over this theater. You can see the show from any angle. It's a pretty impressive show, Andy.
All right, strapping in.
All right.
All right, let's take it. Oh, hi, Conan.
Yeah, hey, Andy, how's it going?
Look at how big you look.
Yeah.
All right, let's cycle through the camera so people can see.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Okay, there it is. Get a little vertigo going. Whoa, oh yeah. Now this is a good way. Hey, buddy. What's going on, pal? Hey, guy.
Refuses
How you
to acknowledge
doing?
you in any way.
What's going on, buddy?
Nope, refuses to acknowledge you in any way.
Hi, friend.
Yeah.
What's your name, buddy?
Very nice. Clearly someone's fleeing the long arm of the law.
Someone's a little shy.
who hasn't paid taxes.
Wait, go back to
in
the
10
other one,
years.
because I want to get...
Oh, look at that!
Oh, there's me.
Wow.
Oh, I
Yeah.
could lose a few. Well, this is what you get to do at home. Oh, hi! You brought your luggage.
Okay. Andy, you look like an idiot.
I do. Oh my God, I just saw myself. I do.
Yeah. Anyway, it's as if you're in the actual theater, Andy.
It really is. It's so much more real than actually being here.
Yeah. Now, those of you at home with headsets can go to teamcoco.com/360 to experience all of this if you like. Thanks to our friends at AT&T for sponsoring Conan 360. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the cast of Silicon Valley.
And you can see as well there, we used Adobe Photoshop with SkyBox to push graphics direct to the ATEM switcher, so we can make small changes to logos, add in supers or anything like that, and do it in a way that it was properly projected. I get really annoyed when I see 360 video where the text is warped incorrectly. And so we were using SkyBox and the ATEM, the actions, I think they're called video actions in Photoshop, to push graphics directly, which was huge.
So acquired, stitched, graded, graphics transmitted close to real time, to several screens close to real time.
Also close to real show production times. So we were another camera department. They did that whole show. They were broadcasting that show. So we didn't have any time for any extra engineering if it wasn't in their schedule. So we basically just swam up next to them and swam with them. And all of the engineers, everybody had to do it and invent things on the fly, essentially.
Changing stitching between shots.
Changing or convergence or the convergence points or color. We have some behind-the-scenes pictures of our team in the.
Actually, we didn't get those up on.
Oh, we didn't get them.
No.
Well, you can see that people we had two teams. There was someone directing and calling camera who was in a headset, and then someone who was doing camera and setting convergence on the focus point for the Ozo, and then the seam points in headset also. All within, for the show, for the broadcast, for the TV show, we never wanted them to know about any of that because it just distracted them from the main thing, from the main attraction.
And this is another example of a shot from that. This is when Will Smith dinged our camera.
All right, you guys ready for Suicide
Oh,
Squad?
it's not projected. But you guys have seen lat longs, right? Everybody's familiar with these sort of images?
Ladies and gentlemen, the cast of Suicide
Okay.
Squad, let's get them out here!
This was a very nerve-wracking moment because as you'll see in a moment, they get really close.
You can see that the stitching is pretty darn good, right? I mean, wow.
And they're getting, Will Smith's is about 4 feet right now, which is kind of absurd. And the camera shakes again.
And Will Smith and Bear.
Oh, bumps the camera. Had trouble getting in touch with his insurance company to fix the senses. But you can see this. So one of the things we also looked at was, at the beginning we were doing these transitions that were really slow, and that became really boring. And so we started cutting faster. We started doing quicker dissolves. Now it becomes an interview, so we can talk over that.
Yeah.
You guys should go to the web and make the hit count go up.
So, questions?
Ooh, it's bright.
Before you all go, so you all have survey forms. If you fill those out before you leave and you submit them, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a 10-inch small 2-in-1 laptop device. So with that, actually, yes, go ahead.
Number 6, yes. You have to actually be present to win. So if you leave the room and we announce your name, you're not here, we'll go to the next one until somebody in the room gets the prize.
So first of all, very nice talk. So for the Conan show, is it just a very simple 2D stitching or it's a stereoscopic stitching for 360?
So we looked at doing mono or stereo. We did have the capabilities to do stereo. We did tests in stereo. However, one of our final deliverables was a monoscopic feed for YouTube, and in order to reduce render time and export times, we switched to a mono. Also because it was UHD and there's not many systems that support 8K switching, we decided that we would rather have the resolution of 4K, a full 4K image, rather than a 2x2. So it was in fact a mono feed, but we kept the RAWs in order to generate post-conversions, just to restitch it, which we do have the ability to do. So it could have been stereo, but we just decided against it.
We think it'll look pretty cool in stereo, basically.
So in terms of your edits and storytelling, what did you guys find like the shortest cuts or other things related to traditional filmmaking versus doing VR?
So all of the cuts are shorter than what Doug is used to. most. The Conan was interesting because we didn't have to introduce anything. That was all taken care of. It's a format and it's a show that the fans are already familiar with. So you could actually, right off the bat, in any scenario, start cutting way faster without making people confused. When you're, I would say in the first episode, if you look, when you're able to look at invisible, the cuts are much slower. And as we got better with our camera placement and with everything as we learned, essentially, there's fights where those cuts are quite short, actually. I think they're 3 or 4 seconds.
Yeah, the series average is 1 every 10 seconds. For action sequences, it's under 1 every 3 seconds. We looked at this concept of this cone of attention where you start out every scene with this wide shot where people look around, and then you slowly but surely concentrate the action so you can then start cutting really fast because people aren't having to go like that and like that and like that and like that, and it gets narrower, 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 and then it moves.
Yeah.
And in terms of camera placement, did you guys have any guidelines or thoughts in terms of?
So we put the camera so many different places, on the floor, in the middle of a conference table, wherever we felt, honestly, very similar to where you would want to, any individual director would want to place it if it was a normal camera. What's the best shot if you want them to be looking at a specific place and elicit a specific emotion? So the thing about hanging out the building, it was a very specific angle that Simon felt like you would be seeing people crawl out a window and climb down the fire escape in a chase sequence, and it was placed there. You were hanging there, but it was also very specifically over them because he knew there was a science to shooting action of where you would feel the most anxiety and the most exhilaration, basically. I know there are directors who feel like they are worried about what the user or viewer might feel like of where are my legs? How come I'm on a table? And thinking about that, we find that when people are screening, they quickly forget about that. If they have those sensations because they're newer to VR, by the time they've finished the first episode, they're barely noticing where the camera is. They're focusing on the story. And that's about 3 to 4 minutes in.
So, in terms of if you had shot this as a traditional 2D type of, flat screen, end result, you thought the VR really added quite a bit to the whole storytelling?
Oh, yeah. And I think actually Conan specifically, watching the 360 videos, we're finding that online, more people are watching it in 360 than they are the clips that they put, the 2D clips that they put on YouTube. We have some hilarious clips where you're on stage with Conan as it happens, and partly that's a live event, and so you feel like it's really there, but it's truly enhancing the storytelling. And I think that about the fight, you're in an action sequence. Here, what we don't have for Invisible, it's an action thriller, and it's a high budget in VR project, but it's not a $100 million movie. So the action, so it'll be interesting when you have comparable budgets to Edge of Tomorrow versus, then you're really, really comparing apples and apples.
But even with comparable budgets, if you're factoring in almost 35% of your budget is going to stitching.
True, but you're spending an awful lot on visual effects in Edge of Tomorrow, also just linear, which many people here would know about.
Okay, so we're going to do a drawing real quick, and then I think you guys are cool with taking additional questions.
Sure.
Okay, so if everybody can make sure you have your forms in, and we'll do that, and then we'll get back to the interesting part. By the way, if we can give a quick round of applause to Jelena and Louis and Chris. I got it right that time.
So Scott can't hide. That's Scott Squires. He is amazing. He is incredible. He used to work at Island. He's doing some incredibly nice stuff right now with his new company. And yeah, go talk to him afterwards too. He's doing some really nice stuff. For 360 space, by the way.
All right, so let's dig through this. Try to make this as fair as possible. Got a late entry. I'm gonna stir that up and look away. Okay.
Okay, so,
What's that? Ah,
yeah.
there you go.
Here, we have 3 prizes. You guys can each give them away.
Juliana, if you would be so kind.
Sure. I can't pull yours out, so you can't put yours in. Okay. Neng Zhang. I think we keep this. You want to keep this, yeah?
Are you going to do 3?
Yeah, he got a tile.
You got what?
It's called a tile. It's like you put it on your keychain and you can find your keys if you lose them.
I can't believe I gave that to you.
Give me that back.
Give me that.
So I have Santee Fort. There you go. Yeah.
All right. Wow.
Not as exciting.
Okay.
There's
One more.
One more.
This is for an exciting Intel fun doll.
So Mark Vokes, is that it? Come on down.
Thank you, Mark. It's what you've dreamed of. All right, so additional questions? Yep.
Did you do any compositing of visual effects or CGI elements, and how did you handle matching the focal length and integrating those into your 360 videos?
Well, Invisible has invisible people in it. So,
In action sequences.
in action sequences, multiple of them, multiple invisible people in action sequences doing absurd things. We worked closely with a house called The Molecule, as well as with the toolbox provided by SkyBox to create images that match the focal length, that work together. The series, I wish I could show you images. The series extensively uses compositing, extensively uses effects. It is a CG heavy picture, and it was handled in many ways the same way you would in a normal production. We just we planned it out. And, oh, my mic's off. We planned it out, and we worked very closely with our VFX supervisor on set at all times, who was also our stitching supervisor, to figure out ways to allow stitching to aid our post-production processes in both the actual CG and also in our stitching.
That was hugely in terms of process. Molecule's involvement in production, not just as post-production, is integral to our success, both in Invisible and in Conan. But if it hadn't been for Chris Healer in Invisible, we wouldn't even know how important it was.
Not all.
All of them, right? No.
No, not all of them. They did a good portion of them.
Well, our visual effects supervisor was Chris Healer, and yes, and he processes. They work closely with John, so they know. And again, as Lewis said, the fact that they were doing the stitching and the visual effects meant we were not passing footage back and forth. It was all could be iterative and creative and integral to their post-production flow, essentially, as well.
There are also pieces that we're working very closely with Chris here to figure out to figure out ways to do them, like more simple effects that don't need a massive render farm to do, to get them to work in the series. There's actually an effect we're working on right now that is I'm hoping to use and lean upon Mocha to build out, which involves Steadicams and things like that. Chris can probably speak to a bit.
Well, our solution for Adobe products and the Foundry solution, I mean, they're facilitators. The whole notion here is take everything you know, take this incredible talent base that has been working in conventional cinema, bring all that talent and know-how into 360. It's a medium, right? There's no reason why we can't tap into all of that. So Chris is unbelievable. He's done wonderful, not me, Chris Healer has done great work at the molecule in conventional cinema, right? What, you know, the only thing we're doing, as far as I'm concerned, at the Foundry and here with Mettle is facilitating this, and Adobe, right? We're just a facilitator in many ways.
So, like, when you were integrating CGI effects, did you do it after the video was stitched together, or just on panel by panel?
Bit of both.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Mostly they're doing it after the video is stitched together, or certainly rough stitched. Their individual process, I think they wait to do all the fine stuff after you have a fine render as well, so that they can comb through.
Understood completely. There's actually a great demo of this over at the Nokia booth yesterday, and it's a bit of both. So like if you take, John uses an optical flow algorithm to project all the images and to do the stereo, and so the final result is impressive. However, in order to get, like, let's say there's a person in a motion tracking suit or something, in order to get that easier to project in, it's much easier to alter that image, bring it in say Maya or Nuke or Adobe, wherever you'd like to modify it, and then bring that back into the algorithm and have the algorithm run again on top of it to bring it in much more simply. However, there are ways of projecting that image in, say, Nuke or Maya or wherever, or in SkyBox. We use it extensively in After Effects to reproject that image and then warp it back into the composition correctly so that it just slots back in. Part of what we tried to do was normalize this post-production process as much as possible, because I don't think it necessarily has to be as complicated as it seems. It's simply warped lenses. Like we've all dealt with that before, and it's a nodal point. We did use nodal heads a couple times to help with particularly heavy shots. As you know, you can get really high resolution out of a nodal head, and if you're panning and doing motion tracking with that. However, you run into this problem where, like, the Gackosaurus that comes with a motion tracking sled is another thing to paint out. And when you're dealing with, can I have another fight scene, or do I have a moving camera on a Gackosaurus? I mean, for me, entertainment-wise, I'd rather see a fight than one moving shot.
Another good place is head down to the Imagineer Systems booth. They do the Mocha product, which is the object removal tracking solution for After Effects and the Foundry and a whole bunch of other hosts. They're showing SkyBox, our product, along with Mocha 5 in After Effects, and Mary's a wonderful demo artist. You'll see some incredible things being done. From simple cleanup of stitches that the stitcher can't resolve to much more sophisticated visual effects right in After Effects.
Doing things like removing a drone's shadow or prop wash or something, and using the Mocha Remove module to generate imagery there is something that we definitely have used. And reprojecting into cube maps. When we first started the project, we looked at actually converting the entire thing to cube maps before, but then realized that the resolution loss that we would have had to deal with would have not really been worth it, and so we've ended up not doing that. But we certainly use the workflow that you discussed, yeah.
I'll be there at 3 o'clock this afternoon as well, and I'm showing some new stuff with SkyBox, some new additions that we'll be adding to make your lives a lot easier. Yeah, so I'll be there at 3 o'clock, but even if you can't make the 3 o'clock show, look for Mary's presentations. Mary Poplin, she's amazing. She's just unbelievable. She's a great artist and a great demo person for that matter, right?
Regarding the pre-production and maybe into production, you bring in a lot of vocabulary from film, but how do you, this is so new, how do you come up with a new vocabulary, make a standard kind of communicate it out to the whole team?
Yeah, that's really hard. It's really hard, and it took a lot of time when we first started. There was so much conversation, and even now, I would say we've cut out, any given shot would have had in the beginning, would have had how are we going to do it conversation could take 3 hours. I think by Conan, we reduced that to between 30 minutes and 15 minutes. you still have, even now, semantic issues where one person is you think you're having the same conversation and one person's talking about the TV paradigm and one person's talking about the 360 paradigm, and that's on your same team. That's not even talking about integrating with a TV show. So I think, one, it's consistency of teams, since there's actually little consistency of language, even in the VR professional world. So we find that now we really like to only bring 1 or 2 new people on a team if we're shooting. Everyone else we've worked with, everyone else we actually know what we're talking about. I think that having the conversations in terms of pre-production, having those conversations up front and then documenting it so that you're sure that everyone's talking about the same thing is one thing that we learned. So that, what?
We should have had a glossary.
You end up having a glossary, yeah, you do. And visual aids are really important too, because even when you think it's a glossary and you're understanding, you're still talking possibly about 2 different pieces of equipment for a specific thing. But you'll save money and time if you have the more of those conversations, and in test shoots. So test shooting and being able to iterate before you're spending money. We actually, when we talk about iteration, it was quite dramatic. We were scheduled for a 7-day shoot, and I shut down production after day 4 because we had shot halfway through and we see nothing. We saw no dailies, we saw nothing stitched. We could see individual cameras playing on the jaunt, but there are 24 cameras. And we hadn't shot with it yet, so we weren't blocking. What we ended up in the end was blocking for a single camera. If we wanted, we would give marks, and if you wanted a close-up, we could get this far away. But you have to iterate, and the more tests you do, and the more rehearsals you do, if you can afford it with camera, the better.
And
essentially, before you have an army that you're paying to be there.
And anybody who touches a camera should know how stitching is and what it is and how it works. And then you don't have to be a stitching genius, but they need to know that. And then if you're shooting stereo, they should know how and what optical flow is.
And anybody you pay as a director or a cinematographer, make sure that they review their stuff and you're with them in headset. Because people will say they know it, and they will think they know it, really honestly, and they just don't.
Actually, you made me think of something. So, Louis and I were talking, it was very early on in the scripting stage, right? So, Louis says, I'm gonna send you some boards, some storyboards. So I'm like, well, this will be interesting. Think about it for a second, storyboards. What I expected, honestly, is some storyboard artist to come back with a linear frame, right, with 1 billion notes, and this is going to happen there, and reference another frame because you're going to see that happen. No, the storyboards that came back were intriguing and perfect. Cubic cross, every view is taken into account.
We forced the directors to storyboard using the 4 across and 3 down.
So you're seeing every view.
Cube map.
And then we built for some of the more complicated scenes, we built a Unity dollhouse. So it was like, we took SketchUp designs that the production designer had built, and we made a dollhouse, and then you can get these awful action figures for free from the Unity store. And we had like Mega Man running around as different characters and stuff. And so you could look in headset.
We did have an art department that was working in SketchUp anyway, so you could do that. The other thing is using thetas, using the cheap cameras. So say you can't afford to have a jaunt for your test shoot, well, you should. The test shoot's different with the jaunt, but if you're talking about blocking and rehearsals, block with a theta and then review. Because it's cheap, it's easy, and your director will get a sense of what it's like if they put the camera on the floor versus high up, and the producers can get a sense of whether their ideas work or not.
So previs animatics, they've all been affected, right? We're adapting, basically. We're finding ways to make it a lot easier. I mean, I'm not as a software tool set, just collectively with this whole DIY spirit and mentality, it's incredible. It's incredible. You're seeing some unbelievable things out there.
All right, we got time for one more question. Did you have one? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are you guys aware of any like new technologies, new cameras that are coming out that are smaller, like theta but higher quality.
So the Gear 360 is not bad for the price. It's actually impressive for the price, and it's a first gen.
And do you know, does it shoot HDR or RAW by any chance?
No, this is $350 US for this camera now.
What are you super tech? That like soldery type of dude?
No.
Oh, so
Maya Tech, but.
well, then you got to zone of proximal development. Look at the security market and look at what security cameras are doing. Because they have sensors that do amazing things.
Yep.
There's like A7S sensors that are 1 inch across that are they don't have sync, but they are, if you sandwich two of those together and you run them on a sensor ribbon and then you do a conversion for a C-mount lens off of that, you're gonna get amazing images. It's not gonna necessarily be the most perfect thing. But if you're looking for higher resolution and HDR sensors, you're going to have to go direct to sensor markets, which is a whole wormhole. But it's fun. The Samsung is great. I love it. Yeah. But you have to order it from eBay.
Thanks.
Awesome, great. Well, Juliana, Louis, Chris, thank you again very much for your time today.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.